I'm Chris. Well, I'm a professor in the Women and Gender Studies department, and I'm also the co-chair of the UCSC. And so our department or our a committee has been looking at P&D proposals over the last year in a kind of expedited process that ended in August. And so I'm going to talk today about some best practices, sort of things that we like to see in the UCSC, and ways to sort of develop good P&D proposals from classes that you already have on your calendar. So thanks.
Thank you, and Sarah. I thought you were part of this. And Wendy, I love that you're coming.
I'm Wendy Raver. I'm the Director of Program and Religion, and we are an enthusiastic supporter of the new pluralism and diversity requirements. We also have worked with Interfaith America in developing a new class and incorporating some of their initiatives regarding pluralism, interfaith work in our classes, and just in general, thinking about how to reshape this for a respect for diversity that we need throughout all of our, not just our classes in program and religion, but throughout the school.
Amazing. Thank you. And Jenny.
Hi, everyone. I am Jenny Rroji. I work at the Office of the Arts. I am the Associate Director and also the supervisor of a very small program called Humanities 201, Explorations in the Arts. Just like Wendy, we were also the recipient of a grant from Interfaith America to include P&D or incorporate P&D into our curriculum. And so we have done, and I think it's something that was very important, and it works truly well with the arts and what we already taught in this class. So I look forward to talking more about it.
Amazing. Thank you. And Laz.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Lima. I'm the chair of Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies. I was involved with the P&D from its inception. And what I'd like to talk about when my turn comes up is to give a little bit of the back history of the P&D and the shoulders of the giants that we stand on, who really foresaw some of the challenges that we encounter today with anything related to DEI, anything related to a more truthful understanding of what the curriculum should be. So I'm going to share some slides with you when the moment comes, and a very short video that I think will be fun.
Yeah, awesome. And Laz, I'm going to have you start, and then I'm going to have Christopher and Jenny and Wendy.
Okay. So can somebody manage the PowerPoint that I shared with you, because once I do, the screen disappears and I have to go in and out?
Sure. So I can share my screen and you'll just let me know when to advance.
Thanks. Much appreciated. So just to give you a sense of the background of P&D, and if we could see the slides, beginning with number 2, I guess.
We're loading because it didn't.
Oh, gotcha.
But
okay.
we'll get there.
So part of the P&D initiative really began over 30 years ago, and it was a result of a presidential commission by President Leclerc, sometimes pronounced Leclerc. And it was a moment of profound optimism in the face of ensuring that we have a curriculum that really reflects the plurality of voices and diversity of various communities, especially in New York City, that had largely been excluded from the curricular purview of traditional departments. And as a way of framing it, I'd like to remind folks that way back then, not way back for me, but way back for so many people, this is a moment where we had, for example, in the discipline of history, the so-called Dunning School. And the Dunning School purported that after Reconstruction, for example, that Blacks were unfit for civic life and that they shouldn't have been given citizenship. So part of the challenge that we take for granted today was what those who came before really began to instantiate as a broader project of making disciplines reflect the character and promise of American political, cultural, and social life in ways that really were just not part of the disciplinary formation of traditional disciplines. And another way of explaining that to students, and I think it's important for us to consider how to bring in students to the conversation in a meaningful way, is to let them know that even women's history, for example, wasn't a thing until the late 60s and its incorporation into history departments and various other units, like, for example, our own women and gender studies, is relatively recent in terms of academic formation. So I wanted to give you a little bit of sense of how this resulted in a 2-year project from 91 to 93 that really took into account the diversity of communities at Hunter, faculty, staff, administrators. And this was an opportunity to change the curriculum in meaningful ways. So if we could forward to the next slide. So this is the primer letter by President Leclerc, who really shared what the purpose was. And I want you to focus, and unfortunately, oh, thank you so much for engaging that. So if you look at the right slide, the last paragraph where it begins with members, what you really begin to see, and I won't read it for you because you have it in front of you, you could begin to see how this project was in itself a way for Hunter to both transform the way that knowledge is produced, but also a legacy for higher education. So he writes, and I'll try to read it as best I can from the screen. If our people can now use this report to create an authentic sense of community, one that respects but also transcends individual and group identities, then we will have created something unique in American higher education. That's pretty lofty, right? This sense of heaviness that this is a contribution to American higher education and not just to our local community. And it really was, it was so. So for example, the 4 categories that became part of the curriculum that I'll be discussing very briefly, and perhaps Christopher will be chiming in as well on that, were and still are requirements that require 4 courses in P&D, designated P&D courses in 2 separate categories. And we are one of the few institutions that actually require 4 P&D courses. So this is an American higher education, not just, you know, within SUNY or city universities. So that's something that we should keep in mind about the importance of this legacy of this project. And if I could get the next slide, please. So that position statement on what constitutes diversity really is stunning to me, because this report also reflects some of the challenges that we're facing today. And I always remind students that we really are standing on the shoulders of giants. And the position statement laid it out very clearly. And I don't know if you can see it from the insert on the far right, that the attacks on the academy about the making of disciplines less rigorous are really a part of the attack that we see today by Christopher Rufo and so many others related to higher education and what constitutes legitimate fields of inquiry. So they were really trying to figure out how to bring in what today we would call trans or interdisciplinary studies. That is, how do standards of evidence across and within fields of inquiry engage in a way that allow us to pose interpretive problems with more nuance than we're used to. So what convinces, I don't know, a literary historian may not convince a sociologist, but it is precisely at that moment of tension between how to access truth and what we deem to be valuable as something that we should study, that we pose those interpretive problems in the interpretive humanities with more nuance than we're used to. And I really wish that we would sort of archive this report. I think I have one of the few copies that was bequeathed to me by my wonderful colleague, Lisa Anderson. And I have a PDF that I think would be great for us to share just in terms of institutional knowledge. If we could go to the next slide, please. And if we could make it just a little bit larger. So some of the faculty who were involved in this project came from the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department, as it was called then. So Africana, Puerto Rican, Latino Studies obviously had a different name. And some of the terms of engagement were how to bring in students and ensure that this version of American higher education that they were getting at Hunter was in fact reflective of the reality, both historical, cultural, and the lived experiences of the students. And another group that was very active was also the group that really sought to bring disability studies as well as gay and lesbian studies and women's studies into the curriculum. So when I say that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, we really are, and we need to remember that legacy, that in the drudgery of filling out a P&D form about a course that you want to be included really has a longer history, and that history really is very weighty, and it is a responsibility for us to consider. So I want to just pause here for a moment because I know that I'm running tight on time, but the impetus of this P&D really created a type of aperture that we hadn't seen at Hunter before. And let's recall that when the campus was built in the late 60s and early 70s, the reason that we have those sky bridges is to keep the city away from the institution. So as part of the legacy of American higher education, when you had these student protests born out of the 60s civil rights struggles for inclusion, Hunter became sort of ensconced. And part of that was on purpose to ensure that the city didn't have immediate access, and that only people that, you know, after you climb various stairs and you cross various bridges, that you could finally enter the hallowed halls of academia. But this moment of transformation post-1993 allowed then for the emergence of Latinx studies, Asian American studies, women's studies, gender studies, in ways that were more reflective of the programmatic interest and design of this initiative. And I just wanted to share with you a brief video that I found in putting this together. And it might take a bit to load, but I want you to reflect on this, and perhaps we could talk about it in the Q&A.
Welcome to Hunter College Library. My name is Polly Thistlewaite. I'd be Miss Thistlewaite to you. And I am a lesbian librarian. Here we are in the HQ 75s and HQ 76s. Those of you who don't know, that's the Library of Congress classification number for lesbian and gay life. You notice that this part of the stacks is pretty well wrecked. That's because it's heavily used, rifled, as a matter of fact. Gay and lesbian people have a very important relationship with the printed word, because it's through the printed word that we often find ourselves in our identities and that we discover who we are. I know that for me, growing up in Decatur, Illinois, it was when I went to the library and found the handful of gay books that they had at the library, that's when I first sort of started putting it together in my head that the feelings that I was having was a universal or a more universal thing than I thought it might be. There are thousands and thousands of coming out stories that involve finding the word gay or lesbian or homosexual in the dictionary, or finding a book about it in the library.
So thanks for playing the video. And as Sarah Chin just reminded us, not all the initiatives that were part of the report actually ended up being instantiated in any way as part of the curriculum. And she rightly notes that disability studies did not get included, and the people involved in that project And I would encourage you actually to review the report in those subsections, because they really do chart a path and a way forward, even in our own political moment. So with that sort of larger frame that I've proffered elliptically, I suppose, might be a good way to transition into the other participants, because I've already exceeded my 7 minutes, I think.
Thank you.
Is it my turn?
It is.
All right, thank you. I didn't know if I was going to be introduced. Thank you so much, Laz. That was amazing, and I love that that video. I'm going to have to show it to my students in LGBT history. And as we're talking, I'm reminded that as a student of Texas Tech University, most of what we teach in P&D would not be allowed there. So I'm really grateful for this curriculum. As you know, P&D, pluralism and diversity are named as part of our mission. So this is really sort of central to who we are, as President Cantor keeps saying. You know, I'm going to talk about some of what we in the undergraduate course of study committee have identified as some best practices for P&D in the different categories. So we're going to look at a syllabus and then proposals that have come from my department. I'm in women's and gender studies. And so almost all of our curriculum has gone through the P&D process or is being reviewed in order to go through the P&D process, because if we're not teaching to these, then we're not doing what we're supposed to in the first place. One thing that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, but that I wanted to flesh out a little bit, is that from the old P&D dispensation, which was a little bit more content-based, to the new one, there is a transition away from content to learning outcomes. And the sort of language of learning outcomes is a little bit different than what you might have used on previous P&D forms. So I know this is a little bit of review, but I wanted to talk about one of the syllabuses that I've seen that is really interesting. And I know the professor, Dr. Liu from the economics department, worked really hard on this to develop a P&D for the accounting department. And we talked about different forms of economic discrimination and how economists and accountants have looked at that. And so she developed this course, Computer Accounting Systems, that really looks at variables around gender and race. And so I wanted to take a look at this syllabus. And one of the things that Professor Liu did with this course is she included the language of pluralism and diversity in the syllabus itself, and use this to explain the course content and to explain what students would do in the course. So this is from the course description. And you can see that she included the language from category 3, which looks at the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, language, and disability. And she talks about how learning programming skills is going to help students to accomplish this. And I really like this. This is a lot more specific than we typically see in pluralism and diversity proposals, but it's something that I would encourage going forward. So you can kind of see here how Professor Liu has explained the learning outcomes in this specific class, and also some of the specific course learning outcomes that correspond to the pluralism and diversity learning outcomes. So, you know, this is one of the approaches. You know, as you submit a proposal, you also have to submit a syllabus. This is one of the things to think about before you start writing the pluralism and diversity proposal, is to sort of think about how your course actually meets those learning outcomes, or ways to bring those learning outcomes out if those are things that are sort of more latent in your course that you haven't really thought about, or if the new learning outcomes, which are based on you know, and we'll take a look at these. So the first one is migration, diaspora, and globalization. The second is residency, citizenship, and human rights. The third is intersectionality and social justice. And the fourth is knowledge construction, environments and technology. So I think one of the things that Professor Liu did is she looked at how these new P&D categories were asking for learning outcomes that corresponded with things that she was already doing in her course. She made some of those more explicit. And I think also has, and this is one of the purposes of P&D from the GER. I think he's also like retooling how her class approaches pluralism and diversity, right? And this is kind of what we want to do across the board, because a lot of classes that have been previously approved have kind of gotten away from those learning goals or from the spirit of what pluralism and diversity is all about. So I'm going to share a couple of proposals that come from my department and talk about the ways in which these proposals approached the proposal itself, the sort of proposal form. So this comes from Professor Rupal Oza's Transnational Feminisms class. It's one of the marquee classes, sort of core classes for the department. If you're considering a P&D curriculum for your department, you might think about ways in which your core courses fit into pluralism and diversity. So this is one of the things that we've done. Although, again, all of our courses fall into that, we really prioritize these core courses. This course qualified for multiple P&D categories, but we used it mostly to think about migration, diaspora, and globalization, which is one of the pillars of our department's curriculum. And so this is how we developed this proposal or with this idea in mind. So for the learning outcomes, it asks students to be able, students need to be able to explain how migrancy, diaspora, and borders have changed over time, how they impact people in a global context. So the second is about the impact of globalization, imperialism, colonialism, et cetera. And the third learning outcome is demonstrating an intercultural competence. So how Professor Oza did this was to kind of correspond specific learning outcomes, which were also aligned with our program learning outcomes, to the learning outcome on the pluralism and diversity proposal form. So that's something that we really kind of encourage, and we really want to think about more than anything else, is how do your learning outcomes meet the learning outcome requirements for pluralism and diversity. So the language that Professor Oza used is really similar here, sort of explanation, understanding. So the our sample readings that are used here also speak directly to those learning outcomes. And there are specific dates where these are taught. And in some ways what we look for is just maybe one example or two examples from the readings that show a connection between the learning outcomes and some of the content of what you're covering. In some ways, this is the easiest aspect of the proposal, because content-wise, you just have to explain what the reading is. You have to just kind of connect, in some ways, like the title of the reading to the learning outcome. And then finally, we do want to see some kind of an activity. The activities, this was an early proposal, but the activities that we saw towards the end of this process tended to be a little bit more complex. We sometimes asked for a little bit more in terms of assignments to make sure that those really met the learning outcomes. But we do really want to see an explanation of activities. It can't just be, students discuss or students have discussion board exercises that raise questions about these aspects of pluralism and diversity. It needs to be something that meets a specific day's learning outcome or a week or a unit. So that's something that is a little barer in this syllabus or in this proposal, but it's still definitely there. So the other proposal I want to take a look at is for an Intro to LGBTQ Studies course. And the reason I want to take a look at this is because we proposed it in two different ways. Partly it's because this course does meet multiple pluralism and diversity requirements, but also because we wanted to give our students the opportunity to use this in multiple fields. One of the disadvantages, I think, of the older system was that the categories tended to be kind of tokenizing. They created these sort of insulated buckets around like gender, class, race. And so what we liked about the current one, especially with the way that we've been teaching our classes more recently, is that we are kind of moving beyond the framework of just thinking about gender and sexuality. And so we are also thinking about citizenship, human rights, and one of the courses that we really do that well in is Intro to LGBT Studies. So this is a proposal and syllabus that was developed by Professor De Lorenzo. And are you seeing this? I think. Okay. Not sure if I see it, but I still see RuPaul's. Hold on.
Yes, or maybe it was the wrong one.
Is this
Learning outcomes and proposed migration, diaspora, and globalization.
No, this is not working very well for me. Sorry.
It's okay. Thank you for sharing materials.
I have
It's
too
really-
many windows open, I think, and that's my.
It's all good. That's the same one.
It is. Okay. Let me see if I can just put it in the chat. But essentially with this proposal on let's see if I can find it again. This proposal on the Intro to LGBTQ Studies, so the learning outcomes, can you see it now? It looks like it's highlighted. So.
Demonstrated good understanding of key terms and concepts.
Yes, I don't know what I did, but it somehow brought it to the screen. So at any rate, this is the Pluralism and Diversity proposal for Category 2, which we used for Intro to LGBTQ Studies, because Professor De Lorenzo talked so much about the LGBTQ rights movement in the 1960s and 1970s. And actually had a lot of material that was related to the Supreme Court and Supreme Court decisions in the last 5 or 10 years, especially around trans rights and marriage equality. And because of that, we felt like this really fit well in the residency, citizenship, and human rights framework. So, this is the course learning outcomes for the class itself. So again, we have this sort of explain knowledge-based learning outcome. So the second one, if I can get it to come up, to identify how human rights abuses have contributed to the educational, cultural, social, economic, and/or political disfranchisement of marginalized populations. This focused more on experiences around transphobia, homophobia, pathologization. So this was something that was already part of the syllabus that fit into these new requirements. And then these learning outcomes around systemic violence, oppression related to class, gender, poverty, race, language, and sexuality, and how those intersect with residency status and human rights. There is a specific discussion that deals with contemporary events, and also a set of readings that deals with the sort of history of LGBTQ rights. So we also have the category 3 included here too, because it fits into that category. And the other thing I won't talk about that much longer because I wanted to talk about one more, which is for category 4. And for category 4, we have a course. Category 4, again, is knowledge, technology, and health. And this is an area where, partly because of the new pluralism and diversity requirements, we've decided to expand our offerings. And in fact, we're in the middle of looking at applications for a search in feminist, queer, trans, healthcare, or science studies. So we really want to expand this. We have a lot of students who are in nursing or hum bio, they're double majors, or they're interested in public health. And this is an area where we can really serve them well. Currently, we really only have one class that meets this requirement. It's called Our Bodies Ourselves. And so we used this is one of our favorite classes. And so it's offered perennially. Currently, it's being taught by Professor Polyak, who's actually a practitioner. And so we used his syllabus in order to develop this this proposal. So the learning outcomes that he uses relate to like health discourse. And so we thought that this fit well in the learning outcomes related to the production of knowledge and epistemology. There is also an aspect of the class that deals with how mental illness is defined. And so there's a learning outcome about concepts, arguments, theories, and methodologies. And so Professor Polyak's class and also Professor Polyak kind of walked them through the process of how diagnostics work. So, and then finally, there is a discussion around equity and justice in the class that you can see in the learning outcomes and also in one of the specific readings that that comes out of the class. Grace Cho's Tastes Like War. So there's a kind of a consideration of the ethical dimensions of knowledge, health, and technology. So I know that's a lot, and I'm happy to share these proposals. These came to the UCSC. They were approved by us. And so we can provide, the UCSC can provide a document that's like a kind of best practices document to chairs and departments if that's something that folks are interested in. But one thing that came out of a GER meeting last month with Brian Buchwald was that we have a couple of categories that are not well represented or not as well represented. Categories 1 and 4 in particular are categories where we'd like to see a few more proposals. So, and 4 especially. So if science courses or science units are interested in developing a pluralism and diversity proposals, I think accounting has some great ones. Professor Luz is really fantastic. And we want to encourage some from other sciences because we just don't have that many right now. So,
Thank you. All right, Jenny.
Oh, it's me. Okay. Hi. So this was really helpful to learn about this other courses. Christopher, thank you. I thought it was very interesting. I was asked, or rather, after we got this grant from Interfaith America, I thought it would be a great idea to incorporate P&D into the course that I currently supervise, which is called Humanities in the Arts. I mean, Humanities 201, Explorations in the Arts. And the reason for it is because a lot of the what we do in the class has already elements of civic life, civic engagement, and pluralism and diversity components that we talk about during the semester. And it creates a safe space in the classroom to linking those with the arts and promoting those through the arts. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about what HUM 201 is before incorporating the requirements from Interfaith America as far as pluralism and diversity. This is not a P&D course, but it does fulfill the creative expression requirement, and it's essentially an immersive arts course under the School of Arts and Sciences that was created some years ago to basically invite all students to explore the arts in New York City, explore the vibrant cultural scene, and all of it free of charge. So going through museum visits, live performances, classroom discussions, which would allow them to expand on the knowledge of the art forms, not so much, into the formal elements or the structure of it, very little, but mostly interested in expanding on their viewing of the arts and how they incorporate the arts into their life. And one of the interesting factors is to acknowledge, once we started teaching this class, is that there is so much hunger from the students to be part of these performances and live art, that part of why they don't know or they do not go to museums or to concerts, it's because they are not just because they're not exposed, but they're afraid of approaching such iconic institutions like the Met Museum or the Met Opera or the New York Philharmonic. And so through this class, they gain some confidence in not only approaching these institutions, but also thinking of perhaps making a career or pursuing a career in some of those art forms. So as we all know, a great portion of our students are first generation. And when speaking of about pluralism and diversity in the classroom, like, we realize this is inherent in the consciousness of the students, and they understand the core values of P&D, and often very proud to be part of a diverse pluralist society. So from that prism, it's impossible to talk about the arts without exploring how artists and cultural movements have shaped the public discourse and challenged injustice and helped communities bridge differences across race, religion, identity, ideology. So in trying to weave these concepts and themes into the course, through readings and performances and shared experiences, I just want to read the goals that, the learning goals for the students that we implemented in the syllabus, which are to, one, understand the role of the arts in shaping civic identity and promoting pluralism, developing skills in active listening, storytelling, and bridge building for civic engagement, analyzing key texts, and that's very important, and artistic movements that have addressed societal divides, and lastly, collaborate on arts-based civic projects that engage diverse perspectives on campus and beyond. So with these learning goals, I am going to go over a little bit the way that we organize the course throughout the semester. And we start with these simple and powerful open-ended questions, which is, what is art? What is civic life? And how do the arts help us engage with it? So through these questions, which no one has the answer, they explore these through discussions, museum visits, concerts, creative projects, and I make sure to allow some room for them to share their experiences. And I start by sharing my own experience, coming from being born and raised in Albania while it was an authoritarian and totalitarian communist regime that suffocated the arts, religion, freedom of speech, so that to help them understand that without freedom of speech and free discourse, we're not really human beings as we should be. So art gives, the understanding that art gives a way to listen across difference, imagine another's experience, and discover our own voices as citizens is part of the beginning of the semester. Then we dive right in the foundations of pluralism through readings and we focus on the Federalist Papers, more specifically number 10, where James Madison argues the diversity of interests and opinions, and how essential it is to liberty, and always start with a quote that liberty is to faction what air is to fire. In other words, disagreement is not a threat to democracy. It's the air it breathes. And we discuss, we open the discussion to get a sense of what the students think. And then in that same spirit, we talk about John Dewey's Art as Experience, which is a very important book, and focus on Dewey's quote that art is not the possession of a privileged few, but a universal human resource, and explain to the students that the way that Dewey sees art is the way human beings learn to be fully alive, to connect through feeling, perception, and action, and that opens up their perspectives about the arts, and also that every aesthetic encounter that they have is a rehearsal for empathy, for understanding what it means to live among others, and it strikes a chord with many of the students, and that becomes, they become more engaged through that. We also dive into Harlem Renaissance, obviously, talk about the Great Migration, and the Harlem Renaissance as a movement. But before we get to all these great actors of change, we talk also about pluralism as harmony. The next unit is pluralism as harmony, not unison. So that's where we bring together a little bit the, musical forms, as well as, readings that talk about cultural pluralism in the arts, quoting or reading from Horace Kalin or Diane Eck in her Why Pluralism Matters, defining pluralism as an energetic engagement with diversity. We think of the cultural pluralism in the arts as, in terms of democracy, being imagined as a symphony with many voices and many instruments creating beauty through the contrast. So that's the way that we approach this, mainly through readings and also diving into important discussions, such as art as civic voice, because I think at the end of the course, for students to realize that movements like the Harlem Renaissance created artists who really redefined American identity through creativity, and knowing from, getting to know Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, and all of these, W.E.B. Du Bois, are really actors of change when it comes to, and James Baldwin is also part of the readings. So
Wendy, I do want to save enough space for Wendy too.
Yeah.
The sound studies person in me is so happy hearing so much of this, but I just wanted to give you a heads up because you asked me to keep time.
Absolutely. I just want to send, I'll send a syllabi to all of you, if you're interested. I didn't present it
Please,
yet,
and
but
I can include it in the recap.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Shall I start? Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
That's really
please.
informative. And I've already taken away so many things that we can continue to grow in this area. And especially the class in, we have a class Religion and Healing, and that the instructor is already doing a very strong queer focus in his class. And that would work perfectly with everything here. And just to be able, it's this continuous process of looking at the syllabi, seeing where we can build the syllabi, even if we have made the pluralism and diversity, like how can we keep that up, and how can we keep refreshing it too for us? So it's been very, very helpful. And the arts as well. I was going to talk about them as well. So, and just how this is a bridge builder for many of our students. But I wanted to address like three main things. We're a program in religion. So like religion has definitely shaped public discourse. And that we have also just, when we have students who register for our classes, oftentimes they think it will be about their religion, or that their personal faith will be the thing on which we grade them. And that takes a very quick adjustment. But at the same time, I wanted to start with a story that where pluralism is a power, 100%. But some of the things our students bring in, like the benefit of having like just respect for the diversity, but also intercultural competence is important, the two together. One of our students, we were just talking about Abrahamic faiths. One of the students raised her hand, very good student, and said that when she was growing up in school back home in Uzbekistan, her teacher told them that Jews have horns. And she said, but it's okay because this is from interbreeding. It's from families living in small communities. This is why Jews have horns. And that, but they get it corrected through plastic surgery very young. And it was, and I just had to kind of hold back and try to show respect. And just to say, that's fascinating. I did the old trick of, that's fascinating. Tell me more. I've heard this as a trope, but like, yeah, this is fascinating. And meanwhile, I'm just like, oh my God, like inside. And but then she said her mother told her that wasn't true. And it left me wondering how many of our students don't have that mother who told them that wasn't true. So part of what we are trying to do, first of all, is working in the classroom and just kind of setting out this idea of making sure students know that they are respected, but at the same time that we want to like kind of steer them in this path that like evidence-based things, that Jews don't have horns. And so we do a little exercise oftentimes, and it is just 3 anonymous responses. What I definitely know is true about X, what I kind of think is true, but I'm not entirely sure, or what I definitely have no idea about. And it can be anything like from Jews having horns to are there laws in Quran that really like push women to the side, or women are unequal, or that, whatever have you. So we just put this out, and students do not have to participate in it. Often they all do though, and they appreciate that it is anonymous. And they just kind of put it out there. And I just say, I'm just going to look at them. I'm not going to sit and check your handwriting. I'm going to toss them as soon as we finish this exercise. So you won't see me going back and seeing that student did this, and I'll shift them around so they don't have to feel embarrassed about what they're bringing in. And then we use that as a starting point, just to be able to look at where they are in looking at diversity. And just so that's one of the things that we do to start with. And then, and I think it does build to constructive discourse then, because I know where to begin the class. I know what they think is right, what's not right. And then I can say, well, why do I think that you're wrong on this? Like, let's go back and look at where I'm coming from, or this student is coming from, and how we go about like the discussion from there. So that's just one of the things that we've tried to do in our classes. But when the new P&D requirements came out, we were very excited because we realized that so many of our classes had this already, and they just needed to have it bubble to the surface. We needed to announce it. We needed to like show that we are doing that, but at the same time, the classes that should have this and where that can lead. And one example that we had for this is the Buddhism class. where the professor who teaches Buddhism is coming at this from like mainly a Japanese perspective. But he was encouraged to add in the conflict in Sri Lanka to this as well, the Buddhist versus Hindu civil war. And there was so much more to that civil war, but just in terms of looking at how Buddhism and Hinduism were juxtaposed in this war, and showing how that created displacement, and that created forced migration of peoples. So like just to be able to include that in classes was very important for us. And also shaping up classes like religion and social justice that had been very much tied to theory, but then bringing this in more of what's happening today, and not just a few key components, but looking at this globally, and then keeping the idea of a flexible syllabus. So I'm teaching religion and human rights right now, and we have the, like, you know, I look at my students and I ask them, what do you want to see more of in this class? And they will tell me that, oh, well, like I have a student who's coming from Albania and she wanted to see more of that. I have a student who's coming from, you know, we have many students with Tibetan backgrounds that were like interested in incorporating that into class. So then I make some quick tweaks and, you know, but the framework is still there, but it's just, let's concentrate now more on this. So that way the students have, their voices are heard. We all benefit from that. Oftentimes they'll share personal experiences or not, never forced. And then it creates this greater classroom community, we think too. And so these are some of the little things that we've done. And then came the just looking at the like Interfaith America initiative and the Interfaith America class. So we're creating a class now on religion in a democratic society and hoping that it qualifies for the residency, citizenship, and human rights. But we begin with history, looking at that it is there. I think this is one of the problems when we see from the other side, that you're like, we're revising history, we're adding things in. It always was a part of America. And just to show that this is part of our democratic society, and that DEI is a strength, and that it's actually the foundation of our society, and it's the foundation of a democratic society. So that's our class that we're working on for hopefully fall. We'll see. We've hit some issues just in terms of whether or not, as a program and a technically non-functioning program, since there's only one full-timer, if I can put anything through the Senate at this point. So we have to work on that, right? And then to also, you know, and just, but in the meantime, to look at the scholarship, keep it current, see who's writing, and really look at the ideas of like what we want to bring into this. And again, like Jenny was so great in talking about the arts. That's also the big equalizer. When you take your students to the museums and you take your students to a show, and they, it was just, you know, something opens up inside of them. And I think it does speak to the idea of that they don't feel that they belong in these spaces. They have been told that they don't belong in these spaces oftentimes. And just because of the number of students that we have that come from New York City public schools, and this is the first time they are going to the Met. And then they'll say, well, I think we went to that dinosaur one, but they've never been to the Met. And it's, I mean, to me, this really strongly speaks to power and privilege itself, like who gets to go to these spaces and how accessible and open these spaces are. And then perhaps how they can make them more accessible and open too, with their suggestions, with their input. And so we try to integrate the arts into all of our classes to celebrate pluralism as well. And that we've been doing since there was an Arts Across the Curriculum Committee a million years ago. And so these are just some of the ways that we're navigating this right now. But it is, I mean, it's based in intersectionalities, but it's also, it's not easy. And we're coming against a lot of deep-seated beliefs and a lot of, you know, like histories of hatred that our students have grown into and histories of intolerance. But that's the work that we're doing. We're trying to break that down. We're trying to break that apart and to show what are the root causes for this. And then where do we go? Where do we move on for this? Like, and what was the, how is this based in some of these issues that we're bringing up? Like residency, belonging, citizenship, just being uprooted, like globalization. How does this impact us all? And it especially impacts religion.
Thank you so much. And I really love the what I know, what I kind of sort of know, and what I don't know. And I think that that is portable to any classroom as like a student forward lecture, like get a temperature check of what's in the room, right? And then we can respond to them with more information, right? Or even ask them to go do some research on what you don't know. Just be aware of what you don't know and then like mentor them in that process, right? About like where they're getting their information from, their sources. And that's like a perfect segue to CDI and the Constructive Dialogue Institute course that we are running. It is asynchronous. It ends with a certification, which is a nice addition to your file for promotion and tenure as well. And it's also a great community where we are guiding students through these difficult conversations, this like deep work, right, that we're trying to do in self-reflection and community. So please sign up for our course. Thank you so much to our speakers. I learned so much. I loved looking at learning outcomes, the history, the cultural, interdisciplinary arts. So thank you so much for your time and sharing so many resources with us today. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you so
you.
much. Bye, everybody. Happy
Bye.
Thursday. Thank you.